Learning to cultivate optimism and positivity may be the most important skill connected to health and well-being. In this webinar, my goal is to share some thoughts about optimism and positivity that you can use to both boost your own health and well-being and unlock your motivation. Well, what is optimism anyway? Optimism, just like pessimism, is a mindset or a pattern of thinking. And mindset is important because it affects our health in two primary ways, physiologically and behaviorally. From a physiologic perspective, how we think about things affects how our body responds physically to a situation via the mind-body connection. And from a behavioral perspective, how we think about things affects what we do and how we interact with the world. Now, we're going to come back to this point in just a few moments, but first, I want to tell you a little bit more about why a physical therapist, personal trainer, and wellness coach like me focuses on optimism in my practice. When I began working as a physical therapist and personal trainer, I was obsessed with anatomy and physiology because I figured the more I could learn about how the body worked, the better I'd be able to advise my patients and clients about what strategy or plan they should use to reach their goals. But after working in the clinic for a little bit, I realized that knowing what someone should do and being able to help someone to be motivated to follow through with a plan were two different things. And so in the second half of my career, I started to obsess more about psychology and motivation because knowledge not acted upon isn't as useful. Now, it makes sense when we go to see a health and wellness coach or any health professional that we hyper focus on what to do, what strategy and plan is the most important. If we want to lose weight, it makes sense that we ask, what's the best diet strategy? What's the best diet plan? If we want to increase our lean muscle, it makes sense. What's the best exercise strategy? What's the best exercise plan? So, focusing on strategies and plans can be important at times. But when I began my career as a corporate wellness coach, I sat across from hundreds of people and heard a similar story many times. And the story goes like this: Charles, I know what to do, but I just can't figure out how to get motivated to do it. And in that moment, I realized that as a coach, I needed to flip the script. And instead of focusing so much on what strategy and plan people should do, I needed to help think about what was their mindset. And I had to think about how to help unlock their motivation. Another thing that emerged when I was in the corporate wellness setting was that when people feel overly down and blah, they rarely have the energy and motivation to pursue their health goals anyway. And that's when I realized that optimism as a mindset could be really connected and important for people's motivation. Optimism from a behavioral perspective is a double-edged positivity sword. And by that, I mean that optimism increases the likelihood that we engage in healthful behaviors, and it decreases the likelihood of us engaging in less healthful behaviors. If we think about some big behaviors that tend to drive health in a good way or in a bad way, things like smoking, drinking to excess, using illicit drugs, comfort eating, it is more likely when our mindset and our mood is more pessimistic that we engage in smoking, drinking to excess, illicit drug use, and comfort eating. And by the same token, when we're in a good frame of mind and our mood is more optimistic, we're more likely to exercise more, have better quality sleep, and experience less stress. In addition to optimism affecting our behavior in that way, an optimistic mindset directly improves physical and mental health. And optimism also breeds hope, courage, and perseverance. And those are all key ingredients for the motivation that we'll need to pursue any worthy goal. Now, I know some of you are already on board and you know that cultivating a positive attitude is important for health. But this is a study that really kind of piqued my interest and made me hone in on optimism as something that was really important for health and well-being. It was a study done by Yale University, and they asked middle-aged people, do you have a optimistic and positive view of aging? or a negative and pessimistic view of aging. And what they found was that when people in their middle age had an optimistic and positive view of aging, it added 7.6 years to their life expectancy. Now, this is just a fascinating result to me, to think that our mindset towards aging could affect our longevity. Now, what's even more fascinating is that there was a literature review of all the studies done on exercise and longevity. And of course, some of the studies had different outcomes, but the median increase in life expectancy from physical activity was 3.7 years. So I'm a physical therapist and a personal trainer. And so I will always say that exercise is important and it can be a key ingredient to living a long and well life. But according to those numbers, having an optimistic perspective on aging could be twice as effective at increasing our longevity as regular physical exercise. Now, again, I'm not saying that we should give rid of exercise, but what I am suggesting is that in addition to thinking about what we eat and how much we move, it may be just as important to think about our mindset in regards to our health and longevity. Now, I mentioned this earlier, and we're going to come back to this and talk about it with a couple examples. Again, mindset affects health because it affects our body, how it responds physically to a situation, and it affects our behavior. So let's first talk about how our body can physiologically respond differently based on how we are thinking about an event. And we'll talk about how it responds when we perceive something as a threat or as a challenge. When we view something as a threat, our heart rate goes up to prepare us for fight or flight, and our blood vessels constrict. Now, this is partly the mechanism that makes stress a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. If we have high heart rate with constricted blood vessels, and constricted blood vessels lead to high blood pressure, if that condition is prolonged, then the cardiovascular system would be at risk. Now, when we view something as a challenge, our heart rate still goes up, but our blood vessels dilate and open up. And this physiologic response is similar to what happens when we exercise and can actually be health promoting. So different thoughts, different physical response. So how we think about things affects our physical health. All right, now let's talk a little bit about mindset and behavior. Now, it's pretty obvious to most of us that our thinking affects our behavior. And so just ponder this scenario. Two people go to their doctor, they're in their middle age, and their doctor tells them that they're becoming pre-diabetic. So they both say, okay, I need to try to do something. And they lace up their shoes and decide to go for a run on a Saturday. After 30 seconds, both of them are out of breath, their lungs are burning, their legs are achy. And now they have to describe or think about what they're experiencing. One person thinks to themselves, man, I'm getting old. I need to keep running to build myself back up and stave off diabetes. The other person thinks, man, I'm getting old. My running days are behind me. I guess diabetes is just part of getting old. Now, in each scenario, the person is experiencing the same thing, but the story they tell about what they experience leads them in different directions. And so this is what I want you to remember. An optimistic story is connected to striving, trying, and growing. And a pessimistic story is connected to giving up, not trying, and not growing. Okay. If I try to make it simple, make psychology simple, here's something that hopefully will make sense. Our mindset and the resultant motivation is a product of what we focus on and the story we tell about what we focus on. Okay, and so I'll go through this again with 3 simple statements about psychology. What we focus on affects how we feel. if we take that a step further, the story we tell about what we focus on affects how we feel. How we feel and think is important because it affects our health and our behavior. Okay. I want to give you an opportunity to pause and reflect. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to hit the pause button and reflect on the question, what went well? Now, you can look over the past day and think about what went well. You can look over the past week, or you can look over the past year, whatever time frame you feel like you want to pick to do a little review and think about something that went well. All right. So again, you can look back over the day, you can look back over the week, you can look back over the year. Take 30 seconds to a minute to pause the video and reflect on what went well. And when you're done reflecting, just hit unpause and I'll be here waiting. All right, welcome back. Now, I'm wondering if there's someone who's reflected on something that went well and happened to smile a little bit, or if you noticed your energy or your mood shift as you were focusing on what went well. And I wanted to put this in here because sometimes we forget that we have the power within us to shift our mood, our energy, and our motivation simply by shifting our focus. And when we ask an appreciative or positive question, it can point us in that direction. So sometimes shifting our mood, shifting our focus is a simple way to change our motivation. Okay. Again, I assume that most people who are listening will concede the idea that positivity is good for us. But you may be wondering, how much positivity, how much optimism do we really need in order to thrive? And that is a question that psychologist Barbara Fredrickson attempted to answer in her research. And she came up with something known as the positivity ratio. The positivity ratio is simply the ratio of positive thoughts or positive emotions to the ratio of negative thoughts or negative emotions. And from her work, what Barbara Fredrickson found was that when we have one positive thought for every one negative thought, we tend to display the mental well-being signs of languishing and depression. Now, the good news is that she found with just a slight increase in positivity ratio, once people got to around 3 positive thoughts for every one negative thought, they tended to display the mental well-being signs of thriving and flourishing. Now, in the emotional well-being world, gratitude has been getting a lot of attention, partly because Barbara Fredrickson and other psychologists who have studied gratitude have found that it's connected to good mental well-being. And what Barbara Fredrickson found was that when people had a ratio that was a little bit lower, formally practicing gratitude could help shift and elevate the ratio. Now, this makes sense. If we are going through life always looking for what's wrong, what's not going well, that's going to color our experience of the world. And if we can start to think about also what's going right, what we're grateful for, it may give us a more balanced mental default instead of us always defaulting to the negative. Now, if some positivity is good, can more positivity be better? Well, up to a point. And this is an interesting finding from Barbara Fredrickson's research. She found that when people had more than 11 positive emotions or positive thoughts for every one negative thought, they tended to be delusional or a little bit out of touch. And I think this is a key point because many intelligent people reject or push back on trying to develop positive thinking or optimism, I think because they fear being delusional or out of touch. And here's the slide just to make that point. So to me, this would be an example of ineffective optimism. It's a picture of a turtle who is lying on his back, and his little thought bubble says, "Oh my God, I'm flying." And the caption at the bottom of the picture says, "Optimism is the best way to see life." Well, the reality is the turtle is not flying, he is on his back. So saying that he's flying is delusional, it's out of touch, it's a lie. And so I would suggest to you that effective optimism is not based on lies. You don't have to look at a bad situation and lie to yourself and say it's not bad. And the goal of increasing positivity is not to eliminate all negative emotions. All emotions are information, and negative emotions have a purpose. They're simply telling us that one of our needs is not being met. And sometimes negative emotions can actually be the fuel that gets us to change. And so I'm not saying that you never have to feel angry, anxious, or scared. But what I'm suggesting is that if our default mindset is shifted so much that all we're doing is focusing on the negatives, that potentially practicing to get us back to neutral can help us to experience more well being and more motivation. Okay, so that was an example of ineffective optimism. And here are three keys to effective optimism. One, any statement you should try to embrace needs to be heartfelt for you and have some believability. Second, it should be personally chosen and not imposed on you by someone else. And third, it should be used at the appropriate time. Now, here's an analogy about number three. If you ask doctors what's the best form of exercise, nearly everyone's going to say walking. Walking is universally known as a great way to take care of your health. But if you just had foot surgery, walking might not be recommended. And so, if we think about a physical injury, when we have a physical injury, we need to let our body heal. And then, once our body heals, we can use a tool like exercise to build us back up, Rehab 101. Or we can use exercise at that point to get us even to a higher level. If by token, we have a mental injury, a mental challenge, some loss that we're experiencing, in that moment, it may be most appropriate for us to sit with, process, and acknowledge those negative emotions. And then once a period passes and we feel healed, then we can use optimism to rehab our mindset or to get us to a higher level. Okay, now I've talked a lot about optimism, but I want to take a little bit of time to talk about pessimism. Now, if an optimist is being honest, they will say that there is wisdom in pessimism. And the truth is that neither mental approach is 100% good or bad. Both ways of relating to the world are necessary and complementary. If we think about what drives behavior, we can lump things into two broad categories. We can get motivated to act to pursue growth and expansion, or we can be motivated to act to protect and preserve. If we think about our pessimistic instinct or our pessimistic mindset, it makes sense that we evolved to scan our environment for threats. And if there was a rustling in the bushes, we'd have to wonder, is this a bear? Is it a tiger? Our pessimistic mindset also helps us to plan in advance for any potential challenges so that we can avoid them or handle them. And when we're a little bit more pessimistic, we tend to be less reckless and we engage in less risky behavior. Many of you have heard the term negativity bias. Well, our negativity bias evolved from a need to protect us. And so sometimes viewing a situation as a threat is the correct and most appropriate response. But just as we can take our optimism too far, we can sometimes also take our negativity too far. I'm originally from New Orleans, but now I live in Boston. And Boston is known for its intellect, its academic success. There's around 70 colleges and universities in the greater Boston area. And Boston prides itself on being a really smart intellectual city. But in addition to being known for its schools and academia, Boston is also known for having really, really stressed out people. Now, we are by nature problem solving creatures, and we actually get a hit of dopamine every time we solve a problem or we identify a problem to be solved. So we tend to feel smart when we can identify problems. Now, interestingly, pessimists make really good lawyers because lawyers have to imagine every potential worst case scenario going into a case so that they have a defense against it. Now, while looking for every single problem and challenge is a good way to practice law, if you go through your life looking for every barrier, every obstacle, every problem in the world, you'll have a certain experience of life. Now, our mental habits are just like our physical habits. Sometimes they develop with intention, but after a while, our mental habits could just be automatic. And when our pessimism and negativity become automatic, gratuitous, and not strategic, then it may not be as useful for our well being or our motivation. Our mindset affects both our experience and our behavior. It can also work in the opposite direction. And it is also true that our experience can affect our mindset. Over the past year, many of us have been experiencing something that has, without a question, shifted our mindset in some form or fashion. And that's the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, we've been facing unprecedented levels of threat. And so it makes sense that facing all this threat, our mindset may have shifted into protection or survival mode. You know, we're worried about our health. We're worried about our family's health. We're worried about our jobs, our family's jobs, our finances, our way of life. So much has been at stake that our mindsets have probably shifted through this experience. Now, again, I mentioned that threat and survival mode is sometimes the most appropriate response. But when we get into protection mode, we build up physical walls and we build up mental walls around us. But sometimes when the threat passes, we feel trapped because of those physical or mental walls. And it can make it more difficult for us to expand, grow, and break through. Okay, I want to offer you another opportunity to pause and reflect. And this time, I want you to pause and reflect on the question, what have you noticed about your mindset during the COVID-19 pandemic? And if you happen to be watching this video many years after the pandemic, you can reflect on an alternative question. What have you noticed about your mindset during an ongoing challenge? And if the challenge has passed, you can reflect and say, what did you notice about your mindset during the ongoing challenge? So again, I just want you to take 30 seconds to a minute, longer if you want to write down any notes, but just simply pause the video for 30 to 60 seconds, and I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. Now, this question is an open question, and so you may have reflected on some negative things in your mindset. You may have noticed that you've become more anxious, more fearful, less risk. Uh, your risk taking may have gone down because you've just been living in fear for so long. But you may have also recalled something positive for how your mindset shifted during the pandemic. Maybe you realize that you really are creative, determined, strong, and the hard experience that you went through revealed those good qualities in you. Sometimes our mindset can hold us back. And so I'll just ask these two questions. Do you feel that a negative and pessimistic mindset is holding you back from pursuing worthy goals and dreams? Or do you feel your well-being is being compromised by a heightened negativity bias and a pessimistic mindset? If you answered yes to either one of those questions, the good news is that you can sharpen and develop your mental skills and shift your mindset with practice. Allen Iverson once quipped, "Practice? We're talking about practice." Well, I made this comparison between mental skills and physical skills already, but mental skills, just like physical skills, can be improved with practice. Now, if you played a sport or an instrument, the reason why we practice physical skills is that when we get into a game situation, we are more likely to respond in a way that leads to success. And the same can be said for mental skills. The reason we practice mental skills is that when we get into the game of life, we'll be more likely to respond in a way that leads to success. From an optimism and positivity perspective, here are 4 mental skills that you can potentially practice: gratitude, self-compassion, self-appreciation, and appreciation of others. Gratitude, practicing on focusing on what we're grateful for, what we have versus what we don't have. Self-compassion is looking at ourselves and treating ourselves with the same kindness and compassion that we treat others. Are we treating ourselves harshly and critically, or are we treating ourselves with love and compassion? Self-compassion is actually connected to an increased motivation to do positive self-care activities. Self-appreciation is the skill of looking at ourselves for our successes, our strengths, and what we're doing well, versus looking at ourselves for our failures, our weaknesses, and what we're doing poorly. Appreciation of others is the skill of looking for the good in others, looking at what we like about them, looking at what they bring to the table, versus looking for the bad in others, looking at what we don't like about them, and looking at what they're not bringing to a situation. Now, there's 4 really simple ways that you can practice developing mental skills. 1, writing or journaling. 2, speaking or conversation. 3, thinking, meditating, contemplating. And 4, conscious doing. Now, let's talk about gratitude and look at all 4 of these ways to increase the skill of gratitude. If we think about writing or journaling, psychologists have actually studied this. And in one classic study, when people journal 3 things each day that went well, 3 daily blessings, 3 things that they're grateful for, it shifted their emotional and mental well-being. And the shift lasted even beyond when the person stopped practicing gratitude journaling. There's something powerful about writing things down, and we know from brain science that our learning is enhanced when we actually take pen and put it to paper. So writing is one way that we could practice mental skills. 2, speaking in conversation. Just as it's powerful to put pen to paper, when we articulate something and say it out loud, it also has an effect on how our brain processes it. And so we could, from a gratitude perspective, just simply speak out loud what we're grateful for. And we could say out loud to ourselves, "I am grateful for my family," or "I am grateful for my health," or "I am grateful for this beautiful day," whatever it is that you're grateful for. You may also choose to have conversations with family, loved ones, clergy about what you're grateful for. And I know that some people have some traditions around the dinner table where people may go around and just have a conversation about what went well or what you're grateful for from that day. In addition to writing and speaking, we can also think or meditate to develop mental skills. And meditation is often described as a way to train our brain. So this is what a meditation would look like connected to gratitude. Think of something that you're grateful for and hold that image in your mind. Inhale through your nose, and as you exhale, stay focused on that image and think in your mind, for this, I am grateful. Now, you can repeat that process 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long you want. But by practicing visualizing and focusing on what we are grateful for, we can train our brain. And when we tell our brain that something is important, it will look for opportunities in our lives to realize and notice that thing that we've trained it to look for. Okay, the last way to practice mental skills is conscious doing. Now, generally when we practice gratitude, it's reflective in nature, meaning we look back over the day, we look back over the week, we look back over the month for what we were grateful for. And there is a benefit in that. Conscious doing is related to mindfulness in the moment and savoring. And so what this would look like is we step outside, it's a beautiful day. We're mindful that it's a beautiful day. So we pause and we say to ourselves, wow, this is a beautiful day. I am so grateful for the beautiful sun. And we soak it in and then we continue on. There are so many opportunities for us to experience gratitude and positivity throughout our day. But a lot of times we just end up on automatic pilot and we rush through our day, not even noticing the good around us. But if we practice consciously doing something and noticing, eventually it becomes part of our mental habits to notice and experience the good around us. And that can have a powerful effect on your well-being and experience of the world. Okay. Coaching can be described a lot of different ways, but I want to say that coaching is like personal training for your mindset. Now, we all know we can do push-ups and sit-ups on our own. We can get on the treadmill on our own, or we may choose to hire a professional like a personal trainer to help facilitate that change that we want. We can also do gratitude and appreciation on our own. And I actually hope that after listening to this webinar that some of you are motivated to include your own positivity and optimism mental practice. But what I'll say is that coaching equals conversations. And one of the benefits of working with a coach is that some insights might be more likely to be gained when you're having a conversation. Now, because I think that optimism is so important for well-being and motivation, I actually created a coaching program around it called Upping Your Optimism Game. And it has 3 pillars to think about optimism, and we can explore and practice what optimism towards life, optimism towards self, and optimism in relationships would look like. It basically incorporates some of the same skills we just talked about. If we think about gratitude, gratitude is looking at life optimistically, looking at the glass as half full, what we have versus what we don't have. If we think about self-compassion and self-appreciation, it's looking at ourselves optimistically. What strengths do we have? What are we good at versus what do we don't have? What are we bad at? And if we think about optimism in relationships, it's appreciation of others, training ourselves to more naturally look for the good in others, what they have, what they're doing well versus what they're doing poorly. Now, I have a ton of experience in corporate wellness and a ton of experience working one-on-one with people. And so if I have said something in this webinar that strikes you and you think, I want to have a conversation with Charles about how I can bring well-being to my team at work or how to enhance my own personal well-being, simply visit my website at charlesinniss.com to learn more about how I could potentially help you to turn your vision into a reality. And I want to leave you with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. This quote says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Let optimism be the light." Yours in health, Charles.